Lucas Jackson.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Let's Talk. My name is John, and today we're here to talk about 1967's Cool Hand Luke and its brand new 4K Blu-ray that just came out from Warner Brothers. But before we dive into that, if you are a fan of 4K Blu-ray reviews, movie reviews, some tech and game reviews along the way, then this is the channel for you. And nothing helps this channel out more than by you liking this video and subscribing to the channel. So Cool Hand Luke was released in 1967. It's directed by Stuart Rosenberg and it stars Paul Newman in probably one of his most famous roles. When I think of Paul Newman, the movie that always pops in my head first is The Verdict and then Road to Perdition. Then slowly right behind that is Cool Hand Luke. But most people probably think of Cool Hand Luke or Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, or maybe The Sting. But Paul Newman was one of the most famous actors of all time. He was one of the most charming individuals. He was one of the best looking leading men that Hollywood ever had in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And then even when he transitioned into playing older roles, you know, he transitioned almost perfectly. Like if you were looking for a charming older man, like in Nobody's Fool.
60 years old, still getting crushes on other men's wives. I would hope by the time I'm your age, I'm a little smarter than that. Can't hurt to hope.
You called up Paul Newman and he wasn't going to phone it in, he was going to give it all, because from what I understand, he was one of the most likable guys in Hollywood as well. And then in this film, he plays one of the most famous anti-heroes ever put to film. This movie probably lines up perfectly if you were to do a double feature with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, R.P. McMurphy, and Luke Jackson. Although I will say this, the crime that Luke commits in this movie, this is going to be full spoilers for this film by the way, is a little bit ridiculous for what he gets sentenced for, because he got drunk and he just basically twisted off the tops of a bunch of car meters, which I believe that would just be vandalism, like public intoxication and vandalism in today's society, and he would probably just get maybe a small fine, but he would definitely not get sent to a prison camp in Florida where he's got to face hard labor for the amount of time that he's there. But there was a reason behind that, because I always thought that was ridiculous, and that's because they wanted Luke to be an everyman, a crime that anyone could commit. Anyone, I guess they felt like back in the 60s could get drunk one night, not even realize what they're doing, and just go make a mess of things because, they're living in their own head. This guy is a war hero. So he's probably having a hard time in his day-to-day life, so getting drunk and then, just going out there and making an ass of himself was probably the norm, but he never really intended to hurt anyone because, he gets sent to a prison with people who commit some real bad crimes, but it was intentional for them to make a crime that could be a little bit more relatable so that people wouldn't, because in the book, he actually ends up crashing into a diner and robbing that, and the director or the writer said that he didn't want to have that because he felt like a lot of small business owners would probably get upset if we're rooting for a guy who actually ended up robbing a small business. Which does make sense, because that's my biggest problem with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, is the fact that what R.P. McMurphy actually did do, which is he basically statutory raped a young woman. I think she was like 14 or something, and his argument was, if you looked at her, she would have looked 18. So that's where it gets a little bit more gray for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which maybe one day we'll talk about that, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about Cool Hand Luke. On this movie, in case you just aren't familiar with it, Luke gets sent to a prison camp in Florida after he commits that crime, and he's not the kind of person that responds well to authority. The warden, played amazingly here by Strother Martin, which in this movie includes one of the most famous movie quotes ever. I actually heard this quote way before I saw the film in the song Civil War by Guns N' Roses on Use Your Illusion 1. What we got here is a failure to communicate. I heard that way before I saw this movie. I didn't even realize it was from Cool Hand Luke until I saw Cool Hand Luke, and I'm like, holy shit, I know that line. And then the line he says even after that, it doesn't get brought up.
It's the way he wants it. Well, he gets it.
Like, the way he delivers his lines with that southern drawl is perfect. He's perfectly cast in this movie. And then another person who's perfectly cast in this movie is George Kennedy. He won the Academy Award for this for Best Supporting Actor in his portrayal of Dragline. And his character, just like Paul Newman's character, has quite an arc in here. He's a big, tough guy. He's really like the guy that all the prisoners turn to because, he's always willing to fight. He's always willing to, he's the big guy in the yard. He's the guy that everyone goes to talk to. He's charming in his own way, but he's never going to cross the guards. He feels like the guards have their own reason for doing their job. I think he says later in the movie he only had 2 years left, so he's willing to fall in line with his guards and not cross them as much as Luke, we find out, does. Luke is very willing to stand up to them because he just feels like, because they even mentioned very early in this movie, he never rose above the rank of private. That means that Luke really is not willing to play ball. He's not willing to abide by what the system is telling him to do. He wants to march to the beat of his own drum. He even screaming at God later in the movie, like, why would you make me this way if this is how I am? He just always has to defy authority. He's not willing to put up with the bullshit because these guards, you know, they lay out the law for him and he's just not willing to put up with it. Now, given these guards definitely overstepped their bounds, especially with the scene after, which is one of my favorite scenes in the movie, when him and his mother are just talking about his childhood and his brother, and basically how she tells him, like, you know, you have 2 kids, but, you know, my love for you, Luke, was much more special than it was for your brother, John, and that's why I'm leaving him the farm and everything, because, you know, I showed you the love. And I feel like in a movie, especially from 1967, one thing that's always considered a sin or just, you know, very dark to talk about is when a parent has a favorite kid. Something, oh, I love all my kids equal. Like, you can say that out loud, but I feel like in everybody's mind, now I don't have kids, so I can't say that. So I can't say that based on a fact. Maybe you guys all do have love for your, you know, for all of your kids equally, but I imagine it's got to be something like that you don't want to say out loud, that you only think in your head, like if you have a certain love for one of your kids. And that scene with him and his mom, them just talking, her laying in the back of that pickup truck, is heartbreaking. The actress did a phenomenal job in that role, and just the one scene that she's in, and then later she passes away, and because they're afraid that, you know, he might want to run to the funeral, Luke, they just lock him in the hot box for the day, which is basically the punishment for any time you cross the guards. He didn't do anything wrong. They just put him in there because they were afraid he was going to run. And this is really where Luke kind of makes the hard right turn to, like, yeah, these guys, they're pieces of shit too, and I'm not going to put up with this. And this is where he starts to, you know, eventually he plans his first escape, and he tries to escape 2 other times as well. And basically, because Luke is always willing to take the beatings, he's always willing to stand up to the guards. He never quits. That's the big thing. Like, very early in the movie, him and George Kennedy, they settle their arguments because they settle their fights. If they have any kind of rift between them, the guards make them fight it out on Saturday afternoons. But George Kennedy is just beating the hell out of Luke, and he kind of builds up the respect of not just George Kennedy's character of Dragline, but of all the other guys, of a guy who will not quit no matter how far he's down. That's a great thing in this world, but as we see in this movie, it could also be a negative depending on who's perceiving it. And the way these guards perceive that is just, yeah, this guy, he's got to be taught a lesson. After the first time he escapes, they put him in shackles, and, you know, that's kind of the punishment. You know, he gave you guys your freedoms, because they do get a little bit more freedoms than you might see, even though they're spending their entire day in the blistering sun just basically doing busy work. And that's another thing with this movie. Like, when they're spreading the tar across the highways and making these roads that this is probably how roads were made way back in the day. Like, this is probably the first time some of these roads were paved. You know, seeing that on film, you would think that's really boring, but somehow the way the cinematography of this film is, you know, you're somehow wrapped up in what these guys are doing. It's just shot so well. And I never hear anyone really talk about the cinematography of Cool Hand Luke, but man, it really is shot beautifully. Maybe it's because I've noticed it more now with this brand new 4K that we'll get to in a minute. But man, I was just wrapped up in this story. You know, you end up falling for all these characters, and keep your eye out because Dennis Hopper is in this movie. If you've never seen it before, in the background, I don't think he even has lines. If he does, they're very small and you know, they don't really drive the plot along. He's just one of the guys at this camp. The message of this movie, you know, still rings true today. Anti-establishment, standing up to authority. These are all things that still ring true well over 50 years later. This movie still stands the test of time. There's a reason why it's in the National Library of Congress as being culturally significant. It's one of the ones that are considered one of the greatest films ever made for a reason. It has 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. Won George Kennedy a Best Supporting Actor Academy Award. So it's one of those movies that has to be seen by a cinephile, and I understand completely why. Warner Brothers would choose this as one of its 100th anniversary 4K Blu-ray releases this year because it's one of the big ones for WB. It's one of the movies that any cinephile, no matter what, even if you don't want to grab this 4K, should check out. But if you do want to check out this 4K, that's what we're going to talk about right now. So here we go. This is Cool Hand Luke on 4K. Came out the same week as another big WB 100th anniversary 4K, and that's the Maltese Falcon, which we reviewed a couple days ago. I find it strange, though, that the 3 big ones that they are promoting this year are the Maltese Falcon, Cool Hand Luke, and Rebel Without a Cause. And they put the Maltese Falcon and Cool Hand Luke out on the same day. It's just a strange decision. I would have thought maybe, hey, push Cool Hand Luke to next week, but either way, I'm very happy because Cool Hand Luke also got a 4K Steelbook, and I opted for the Steelbook because the slipcover, it's very obstructed by the fence on it, and I thought, oh, you know what, this really does stand out, and on the back you get that line, what we got here is a failure to communicate, so I really appreciated the hell out of this Steelbook, just based on pictures, so I was happy to grab it. Paul Newman on the cover, I love the blue and the white, that glossy blue, and then the white finish on this, it might be hard to tell on camera, is more of like a matte finishing, so it's kind of alternating colors. So this is for a studio release of a 4K, really nice Steelbook here. You open it up, and this is something you don't see much. So not only do we get the interior artwork in black and white, which is awesome, and you're thinking, oh wow, look at that. Black and blue, 4K on black, Blu-ray on blue disc. You're thinking, no individual disc design, but yet if you look closely, there is with the dogs on the bottom. And I didn't bring that up in the movie part of the review, but that absolutely broke my heart. There's a scene in this movie where the dog basically ran himself to death trying to hunt down Luke, and I don't know if in 1967 if we were supposed to just be like, oh, you know what, that's what the guard gets because he's an asshole for chasing Luke down, or if they wanted us to feel sad, because I gotta be honest, I'm a dog lover. I have 2 dogs myself. You guys know Matt has 2 dogs himself. So dogs to me are, they're sacred almost. I have 2 dogs. They're basically my kids. I would do anything for them. So seeing this guy and the way he reacts to his dog Blue dying, I mean, honestly, it broke me. It really ripped me apart. I have a real hard time seeing a dog die on screen, like in the first John Wick, Marley and Me, Old Yeller. Like, that's something I've always had a hard time with that. People, I have no problem. It's really kind of sick, and I think I'm not the only one in this, where like a human dies on screen, you could just because you've seen it so many times. When a dog dies because of their innocence, it really, really hurts, and it really broke me in watching it this time. It never broke me before, but yeah, it really unzipped me.
Oh, you unzipped me. Oh!
I'm not going to sit here and lie to you guys. It was hard for me to see because they linger on the dead dog for a very, very long time. And my puppy that I have is part hound, so it makes it even worse. But anyway, enough of that. So yeah, you get the individual disc design on here, which is really cool. I like that. Even though it's still in the studio design of black and blue, I still do appreciate the individual disc design, even if it's not the most outlandish or something that's going to stand out. I still do appreciate they put that little bit of extra effort into this. Now, the audio is just a DTS mono track. It's a 2.0, so it's just going to have 2 channels, and that is it. From what I understand, the previous Blu-ray from 2008, which is the pack-in Blu-ray in this, so that's a 15-year-old Blu-ray, that just had a Dolby mono track on it, an old mono track. I compared the audio, and just like with the Maltese Falcon, very similar. It's just a slightly more clearer and crisper on the new 4K track, because they definitely went in there, cleaned it up a little bit, but it was actually pretty good on the previous Blu-ray as I was comparing them. Now, the biggest jump, and this is just something that Warner Brothers does a phenomenal job of, I've been talking about this basically since their Christmas releases at the end of last year, is they just have a huge jump from their previous Blu-rays to their 4Ks. This is no different. We've seen this with Elf, Christmas Vacation, Polar Express, Casablanca, Maltese Falcon, Training Day. There's just a huge jump from those Blu-rays to the 4K, and this is no different. I'm telling you, when I got to the first scene of this movie, when he's undoing the meters, I was like, oh, my jaw hit the ground. I was like, oh my God, this is beautiful. Now, there is no Dolby Vision, just like most of these Warner Brothers releases. I don't know if they have a thing with Dolby Vision or not, but it is just HDR10 on here. No problem. Warner Brothers seems to make the best use of the HDR10. I don't even know if they need Dolby Vision on any of their 4K releases personally. I've been so impressed with the visuals, and this is just no different. I mean, I'm telling you, it's a big jump from that Blu-ray to the 4K. Now, it could be argued that this isn't the most visually pleasing movie. It takes place in Florida, it's in the hot summer day, and they want it to look ugly on purpose. The interiors are all, one single light hanging in, each room that they're in pretty much. It's very dark and dreary. It's supposed to look that way. But I never really paid attention to the cinematography of this movie until this 4K, because I'm looking at it, and they do some crazy good shots. The one guard is, they call him the man with no eyes. He's wearing sunglasses. They zoom in on his eyes, and you see the reflection of the men in his sunglasses. It's crisp and clear. It pops off your screen. The blacks are so much deeper. Comparing it to the Blu-ray especially, it seems like on the Blu-ray there was the white balance might have been a little bit too high on it, so it kind of creates like this little haze. You've probably even seen it in our videos when I screw that up on maybe the exposure on when they were editing it for the Blu-ray. It was a little bit too high, and they definitely got that all locked in, and it all looks just crisp and clear. There's a little bit of film grain, but nothing that's going to ever take you out of it. I mean, this is one of the best visual transfers I have ever seen Personally, from a Blu-ray to a 4K, I just think it's a phenomenal jump. I just don't think it's going to be something that you're going to sit there and go, wow, that blew me away, if you've never seen the movie before, because in comparison to other 4Ks, you know, ones that have like beautiful colors that are going to pop off your screen, this is not. It's a very flat looking film intentionally. But as you know, he's got that blue on, but again, in the movie, that blue is very faded and dirty, so it's going to look, you got to kind of taper your expectations. But on the other hand, this movie came out in 1967. I'm telling you, while you're watching this 4K, it's just going to pop off your screen. You're not going to believe that this movie was shot in 1967. Let's put it that way. It looks phenomenal. It's a huge, huge jump from that Blu-ray. So if you have that 2008 Blu-ray, not only will you get this 4K and that Blu-ray together, but you're getting a big jump from that Blu-ray. And if you're a fan of Cool Hand Luke, I think I can recommend this at the full price that it's going for. And I could also recommend you grabbing the STEELBOOK from Best Buy, unless you're not really a fan of Best Buy, because like I've said in the past, I'm not too big of a supporter of their business ethics and their morals. They seem to like want to screw the consumer over. But if you do want that STEELBOOK like I did, you have to get it exclusively from Best Buy, and I do think it's a better option than the slipcover. Of course, that slipcover version is sight unseen. I've only seen this version. So, you know, maybe you have a preference and you like that slipcover version. Hey, I completely understand, but if you do want this STEELBOOK, I could definitely recommend it at the full price, just because I was so blown away with the jump from Blu-ray to 4K. Now, like I said also, the extras, they're all the same. They're both actually on the Blu-ray and the 4K. There's just not much. There's a 28-minute documentary on there that I think is the standout of this. I would have liked so much more. I would have liked looking back on this movie. I would have liked some film historians, some critics, you know, people who might still be alive, some producers, all looking back on the cultural significance of this film and just looking back at what this movie did for movies, looking back on Paul Newman. I would have preferred all of that on here, but what we got is the same 28-minute documentary that we got back in 2008. And I mean, all the interviews on this, like, the people are still alive who are since passed away are all in the interviews on this, which is cool, I agree, but you could tell that they shot this documentary a pretty damn long time ago. It would be nice for us to get something a little bit more updated. This is something where I think like Criterion, if they would have jumped in and grabbed Cool Hand Luke, because this is something that would be perfect in their collection, we would have got a ton of more extras on here. But can't complain too much as long as those visuals are outstanding and the audio is at least, because you can't expect the best audio for a 1967 film. As long as it's crisp and clear and you can set your remote down, I think you'll be happy with it. But one thing, just to be clear before I give my final grade, this is the kind of film that does go on sale. It's a studio release. It's Warner Brothers. Depending on where you are, you know, I live here in America. We have Memorial Day coming up in May, 4th of July coming up 2 months after that. So, you know, these are the kind of movies that do go on sale. So really, if you aren't a big fan of Cool Hand Luke and you just wanted to grab it and check out the visuals, yeah, I could definitely say, hey, why don't you wait for a sale, grab the Maltese Falcon and this and that. But if you are a big fan of Cool Hand Luke, I could tell you, you're going to grab this at the full price and you will not be disappointed with it. So what would I give this out of 10? I would still give this a really solid 9 out of 10. I'm only taking a point off just because of the lack of any new extras. Everything else was perfect. I have no problem with the packaging, no problem with the audio. The visuals is a huge jump from that Blu-ray. So if you have that Blu-ray, I'm telling you, it's night and day compared to comparing them. Given 15 years is going to do that. You look at me 15 years ago and look at me now. I mean, yeah, I might not have aged as well as this film has, but hey, I have aged, so you got to understand how that works. But yeah, I could definitely recommend this. I am so happy that I checked this out last night again. I had a great time watching it, and even if you don't want to grab this 4K, please check out Cool Hand Luke. I promise you, you won't be disappointed. And if you do want to grab it, we actually have an Amazon affiliate link. If you grab this through that, like I said, it's only going to be that slipcover version, but if you do grab it through that, it really helps this channel out. If you use that link, it costs no extra money for you, and it helps us to keep doing these 4K Blu-ray reviews. But if you don't want to do that, simply just liking this video and subscribing to the channel really does help support us. And then after you're done doing all of that, I just want you guys to go out, go for a nice jog in the streets, and anyone you see, I want you to tell them about us. And then, I want you to enjoy your day. We'll be seeing you around.